Okay, and we continue. 5.5, part 3. Today we're going to talk about half angle and the half angle identities. So there are four identities, four formulas we're going to talk about. The sine of half a theta, plus or minus square root of 1 minus the cosine of theta over 2, and all of that is in the radical. The cosine of half a theta is plus or minus square root of 1 plus cosine over 2, again inside of the radical. For tangent, there are two formulas. It doesn't matter which one we use, we will get the same answer. I think I'm going to be using this one, but it won't matter which one we use. So, that plus and minus. To determine what sign we're going to use, we have to look at where the theta over 2 is ending, and what quadrant that will be. Not the quadrant of theta, but the quadrant of theta over 2. And one quick note here, this is theta. When we calculate this, we got to find that angle on top over 2. When we look for that angle, when we get the cosine of that angle, we need to figure out that one. And so that is something we got to talk about. So I'm just going to highlight it to refresh or to talk about it more in depth when we do our examples. So here goes number 1. To find the exact value of cosine of 112.5. 112.5 is in quadrant number 2. And because it's in quadrant number 2, I know that the cosine is negative. And so when I write it out, I'm going to use the negative sign, not the positive, but the negative, because the cosine is negative in quadrant 2. So when I see this, I need to get the cosine of an angle divided by 2 that will give me 112.5. And we could figure this out. We could multiply that by 2. And we could figure out that it's 225 divided by 2 is that. So when we're looking for the cosine of 112.5, that's getting the cosine of 225 divided by 2. Same number. And because we have this, I'm going to use my formula of half a cosine, and remember that says plus or minus, but I'm going to use the negative sign because of what we talked about over here. So I go 1 plus the cosine of theta over 2. That theta is whatever angle I have there. In this case, is 225. And all of that is in the radical. So let's see what happens. I need to get the cosine of 225. I could draw a triangle, quadrant 3, 225 will give me a measurement of negative rad 2 over 2. Again, you can pause the video and verify that. That's quadrant 3. So I'm going to continue. I'm going to do a little bit of math. Remember, this is all inside of the radical. So I'm going to have to add those fractions. So I'm going to make the same denominator, 2 over 2 minus rad 2 over 2. So let me come over here. So then I get negative the square root of 2 minus the square root over 2, and all that is divided by 2. Again, it is in the radical still. And because it's in the radical, I have to divide that by 2. So to divide by 2, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, 1/2. Again, divided by 2 is multiplied by 1/2. And let me continue here. In the radical, I get that. So now I have a fraction in the radical. And if I have a fraction in the radical, I'm going to take the square root of the numerator and take the square root of the denominator. I know that's funky. That's okay. This one is 2. The square root of 4 is a 2. And my numerator will look like negative the square root of 2 minus rad 2. And that is the exact value for cosine of 112.5. We're not going to calculate that. We're done. Leave that alone. All right, I'm going to try a few more. Number 2, the sine of 175. So I need to figure out if it's going to be plus or minus. 75 degrees, that's in quadrant 1. And because it's in quadrant 1, the sign will be positive. Positive. The sine of 75, I need to figure out a number divided by 2 that will give me 75. So multiply that by 2, it is 150 over 2. And so this is the half angle that I'm going to use, 150 over 2. The sign is plus or minus. I'm using the plus sign. 1 minus the cosine of theta over 2. And the theta that I use, the angle that I use there is the angle that I have there, 150. I need to calculate this. I'll draw a triangle. 1 minus that divided by 2. Try to take the square root of that. And I know it'll be kind of messy, very algebraic. Let's see what we get here. It is positive, so I'm going to drop the positive sign. The cosine of 150 degrees, I could draw a triangle 150. It is quadrant 2. And the cosine will be negative rad 3 over 2. So then let me continue over here. Everything's in the radical. I'm getting the same denominator. I'm going to put a 1 under that. This will be a positive. Okay. Same denominator there, so I'm going to get 2 plus rad 3 over 2 and divide that by 2. Again, everything is in the radical. As I continue, instead of dividing by 2, I multiply by the reciprocal. And that will allow me to multiply 2 times 2 will be a 4. Just like on part A, you cannot take the root of the numerator because there's a root inside of that. But you could take the root of 4. That's simply a 2. So the sine of 75 degrees is equal to that. All right, one more. To find the tangent of 7 pi over 12. Well, 7 pi over 12, let me deal with a degree. I could multiply by 180 over pi. That really comes out to be 105 degrees, and that will be easier to draw my triangle. A quick note, For a tangent, I don't have to worry about plus or minus. I do have to worry about figuring out what formula to use. And there are two formulas. We'll see which one is easier to deal with. So the tangent of 105 has a half angle, something divided by 2. Well, multiply by 2, and it's 210. 210 divided by 2 is 105. And so when I figure out the tangent of 210 over 2, the formula that I'm going to use is 1 minus the cosine of theta divided by the sine of theta. 1 minus the cosine divided by the sine. And the angle that I'm going to use is that one. So pause the video, figure out that number, and then we're going to do some algebra. So the cosine is negative rad 3 over 2. The sine is negative 1/2. So now the algebra. More algebra. Multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of negative 1/2 is negative 2 over 1. And when you multiply by the reciprocal, I can reduce the 2 and the negative 2. And when I do that, I will have a negative 1. And that negative 1 I'm going to multiply to that, which will then give me negative 2 minus root 3. And that's my answer. Okay. Homework. (29 to 32 all). I will post some of the answers up hopefully today. Have fun.